Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Every year at this time, I typically shoot a series of videos about starting your plants from seed. This year, I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to shoot a single video and it will cover starting your plants indoors from seed all the way through to transplanting them out in the garden. And I'm going to keep it to a reasonable length. Seed starting is really economical. For example, this packet of lettuce seeds cost me $2.50 and it contains 250 seeds. That means each head of lettuce that I grow will cost me about 1 cent. I'm pretty sure you can't buy a head of lettuce in the grocery store for that price. When you start your own plants, you can grow varieties that you can't find in garden centers and nurseries. They only have room for so many varieties. So this will give you the opportunity to grow all sorts of amazing vegetables and flowers. But most importantly, seed starting is a skill that everyone should have. And I'm hoping this video will give you the confidence to start doing it this year. You will need clean containers that have drainage holes in them. You can buy seed starting trays at garden centers, or you can use flower pots, plastic food containers, and so on. Some folks like to use soil blockers, which allows you to form blocks of soil for seedlings to grow in rather than using plastic pots. You'll also need a container that doesn't have holes in the bottom to set your seed starting containers into. I've also found that boot trays work great because they're really sturdy and very inexpensive. The containers will need either a clear plastic lid or a clear plastic bag for the first part of the process, which I'll explain shortly. You'll want seed starting mix, which is also known as germination mix. Don't use garden soil because it can contain pathogens. I also heartily recommend some milled sphagnum moss to inhibit the growth of the fungi that cause damping off disease. The fungi can kill seedlings really fast. I use Succeed Seed Starter from Moss or Lee to inhibit those pathogens. It's in my Amazon storefront and I'll put a link to it in the description of this video on my YouTube channel. And don't be confused by the name on this bag in the photo because the company recently changed the name of the product. It's the same thing. You'll want plant tags of some sort if you're going to start multiple varieties of veggies or flowers. You will need a fertilizer. I prefer to use Alaska fish fertilizer because it helps the seedlings get off to a great start. I also recommend a Spoma organic vegetable fertilizer for transplanting time, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Some seeds benefit from a little extra warmth, so seedling heat mats are helpful for this. I use a heat mat for some types of flowers and also for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. If seedlings such as tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers will need to grow for a while before it's safe to plant them in your garden, you'll want some extra 4-inch to 6-inch pots to move them into. I'll talk about that more in a moment. And of course, you'll need seeds. The great thing about seed packets is they're super informative. They'll tell you when to start the seeds, the planting depth, how much to space them out in the garden, and any special considerations that are unique to that type of seed. For example, I have some that indicate you shouldn't cover the seeds with soil, but start them in the dark. My solution for that is to place the seeds on top of the soil and cover the planting container with a cardboard box until the seeds come up. Hey, it works. I wanted to address seed viability for a moment. Some seeds last quite a while, other ones not so much. So how do you tell the difference? Well, if you go to my website, susansinthegarden.com, and hover over the guides menu, you'll notice that there is a link that says seed viability. And that goes to the chart I created for the most commonly grown vegetable crops. So you'll notice that onions, parsley, and parsnips only last about a year, whereas lettuce gets the prize for being good for 6 years and even longer. If you have old seeds and you're wondering how to tell if they're still good, here's how to do it. Take 10 of those seeds, wrap them in a damp paper towel, put them into a plastic bag, and set them somewhere out of the way. Check on them every few days to see if they're sprouting, and give them about 10 to 14 days. At the end of that time, open the paper towel and count how many seeds have sprouted. That's the beauty of doing this with 10 seeds. If all of them sprouted, that's 100%. If 5 of them did, that's 50%. Then you'll know if the seeds are worth planting indoors or out in your garden. Easy peasy. The most important thing you need to know is your area's average last frost date. If you're brand new to the area or new to gardening, ask your local Master Gardener program, which is a free service, or garden center staff, or a gardening friend or neighbor. This will help you determine the right time to start your seeds. There are 2 main types of vegetable crops: cool season crops and warm season crops. Examples of cool season ones are lettuce, carrots, beets, spinach, and broccoli. They are typically planted before the last frost date or late in the season as a fall crop. Examples of warm season crops are tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, melons, pumpkins, cucumbers, and squash. Warm season crops are planted after all danger of frost has passed. Lightly moisten your seed starting mix and fill your containers with it. Plant your seeds at the recommended depth and preferably 1 seed per cell of your seed starting container. Then lightly sprinkle the Succeed seed starter on top of the soil to protect the seedlings from damping off disease. Either place a clear dome lid over the container or use a clear plastic bag. Either of these will increase the humidity, and that's what helps with germination or sprouting of the seeds. Place your planted containers under a grow light if you have one. You can put them on a windowsill, but know that you're going to need to flip around the containers frequently because the seedlings are going to lean toward the sunlight. When they're on a windowsill, the sunlight is not as intense as the light you would get from a grow light. We use a grow light that's on a timer to come on at 6 a.m. and turn off at about 9 p.m. Yep, that's about 15 hours a day. Seedlings start out with seed leaves first, which are technically called cotyledons. Then they'll develop their true leaves, which look just like the mature leaves you'd expect to see on a plant. In this photo, you can see both the little seed leaves on these young tomato seedlings and some emerging true leaves. If you're starting onions, shallots, or leeks indoors, you'll notice their leaves are more tubular. When the majority of the seeds have germinated, remove the clear dome lid or plastic bag because it has served its purpose. This is when you need to start keeping an eye on the moisture in the soil. Your goal is to have the soil lightly moist, not sopping wet, and not bone dry. Let the seedlings grow a bit, and once they have a couple of true leaves each, start fertilizing them about every 2 weeks. I use the Alaska fish fertilizer, but while the seedlings are young, I only use it at half strength. The label says to use 2 tablespoons to a gallon of water, so instead what I do is I only use 1 tablespoon of the fertilizer to a gallon of water. If it's too early to transplant your seedlings into the garden, but you start seeing roots emerging from the bottom of the container, you need to up-pot them, and that means moving them into a larger container so they have room to grow. This involves carefully removing them from their seed starting containers. Never pull on the stems because this can damage or even kill the seedlings, and you don't want that. Instead, use a screwdriver or a small trowel to gently lift them out of the container. Transplant each one into a larger container, and that's where those 4 and 6 inch containers come into play that I talked about earlier. When you start plants indoors, they are not used to how intense the sunlight is. If you move your seedlings right out to the garden without acclimating them to the sunlight first, the leaves will become burned, like you see in this photo, and it can even kill your seedlings. That is a waste of your money and time and defeats the purpose of growing your own plants. The goal of hardening them off is to slowly acclimate them to the intensity of the sun over the course of about 7 to 10 days prior to transplanting them into your garden. This is such an important step. Here's how you do it. Set the seedlings outdoors in part shade for 1 hour, then move them back indoors. On day 2, set them outside for 2 hours, then move them back inside. Day 3 is 3 hours outside, and so on. Starting with day 3 and going on from there, keep placing the seedlings into an area with a bit more sunlight. By the time you hit those 7 to 10 days, depending upon what works for you, they should have been getting full sun for a few days. What if you work? You can still accomplish this by placing your seedlings in a shady, protected area during the daytime for a few days, then move them to a partly shady area, and use your days off to put them into a brighter area to slowly acclimate them to the sun. By the end of the hardening off process, your plants will be raring to go. When transplanting the seedlings out into the garden, dig a hole that's a bit deeper than the plant's root ball. Add a bit of organic vegetable fertilizer, and as I mentioned earlier, I really like Espoma organic fertilizer. And place about 1 inch of soil on top of the fertilizer so the roots aren't in direct contact with it. Plant the seedling and press the soil around its root system to remove air pockets. If you're growing a climbing plant, now is the time to provide it with a stake or other support. Okay, that's the grand overview of seed starting. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions at all, just drop me an email at susan@susansinthegarden.com. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.